The ocean was still dark when the fighter rolled toward the edge of the carrier deck, its wingtips cutting through the morning haze. For a few heartbeats, there was nothing but the thrum of an engine and the quiet knowledge that once the wheels left the steel beneath them, there would be no second chances. Out there, beyond the safety of the fleet, history was written not in ink, but in salt water, fire, and the steady hands of young aviators who learned to trust their machines as much as themselves. That moment, repeated thousands of times across decades, is where U.S. naval aviation found both its courage and its identity. From its earliest days, it asked ordinary men to do extraordinary things, and in the long arc of that story, one aircraft would rise to become an icon of the Pacific War, a machine whose silhouette still stirs something deep in the American memory. The F4U Corsair did more than fly. It carried hope across an ocean, fought battles far from home, and etched its legacy into the sky. But to understand what this aircraft truly meant to the pilots, to the Marines it protected, and to the generations who remember it, we must follow its journey from the birth of naval aviation to the firestorms of war, and finally, to its place in American heritage today. Before the F4U Corsair carved its legend into the skies of the Pacific War, the very idea of fighting from the sea was still fragile, an experiment balanced on canvas wings and the nerve of a single man. In November 1910, Eugene Ely guided a fragile biplane off the deck of a modified cruiser on the Virginia coast. There were no arresting wires, no catapults, no manuals, just a clear line of deck, a stiff wind, and the belief that a new age of warfare was about to begin. When Ely later landed on another ship in San Francisco Bay, the moment did more than astonish the Navy. It marked the quiet, irreversible birth of U.S. naval aviation. In the years that followed, Pensacola, Florida, the cradle of American carrier aviation, became the proving ground where every naval and marine aviator learned the craft of flying from the sea. Here, young men trained under hard skies, practicing the precision and discipline that carrier operations demanded. Their aircraft evolved too, from the light, fabric-covered trainers of the First World War, to fighters with metal skins, powerful engines, and the resilience to survive the unforgiving conditions of saltwater operations. By the late 1930s, the world was shifting. Storm clouds gathered over Europe and Asia, and the United States began to sense that the next war would stretch across oceans. Designers and engineers, men like Glenn Curtiss and the Chance Vought team, pushed forward relentlessly. Machines grew faster, stronger, more suited to the massive distances of the Pacific. The Navy watched Japan's rising air power with increasing concern. The Zero was fast, agile, deadly, and American forces knew they would need something new, something exceptional, to meet it head-on. The attack on Pearl Harbor shattered whatever illusions remained. The vastness of the Pacific was no longer a barrier, it was the battleground itself. Carrier decks became launching pads for America's response, and naval aviators shouldered a burden larger than their years. Outnumbered, outmatched in certain theaters, they learned quickly that survival would depend on innovation as much as courage. It was in this crucible that the idea for a radically different fighter began to take shape. Engineers envisioned an aircraft with the largest engine ever mounted on a carrier-borne airframe, an engine powerful enough to outclimb, outrun, and outfight anything the enemy could send. But such power came with challenges: an enormous propeller, landing gear that needed to be sturdy yet compact, and a frame that had to withstand brutal carrier landings. Chance Vaught's solution would become one of the most recognizable silhouettes in aviation history. The story of that aircraft, the machine that would soon define an era, was only beginning, and as the war intensified, the skies over the Pacific were waiting for the fighter that could meet the Zero on equal terms and help turn the tide for U.S. naval aviation. The Pacific War did not unfold slowly. It erupted. The smoking ruins of Pearl Harbor were still raw wounds when America answered with a mission that seemed impossible: the Doolittle Raid. 16 B-25 seconds Army bombers never meant for carrier decks rolled down the pitching bow of the USS Hornet. It was a message, not a military turning point, but one that thundered across the Pacific. The United States would not wait to be struck again. It would carry the fight to Japan, no matter the distance. In the months that followed, carrier aviation became the sharp edge of America's response. The Battle of Midway proved that U.S. naval aviation could change the course of a war in a single morning. Dauntless dive bombers, flying through smoke and flak, found and destroyed 4 Japanese carriers, ships that had once seemed invincible. The Pacific, so vast and unforgiving, was no longer dominated by one empire. Control would now be contested aircraft by aircraft, mile by mile, sacrifice by sacrifice. Into this shifting, volatile battlefield came the fighter that would redefine the air war, the F4U Corsair. Its inverted gull wings and massive engine gave it a presence unlike anything in the sky. But beauty had nothing to do with it. The Corsair's design was pure purpose: speed to chase the Zero, power to climb out of danger, and firepower to tear through enemy formations. Pilots soon learned that the aircraft didn't just outperform the Zero, it outlasted it, surviving hits that would have torn lesser fighters apart. By 1943, the Corsair was everywhere, escorting bombers over island strongholds, sweeping ahead of amphibious landings, and meeting Japanese fighters in brutal, swirling dogfights above cloud-topped seas. On the ground below, Marines in the island campaign began recognizing a sound that meant salvation. The wail of a Corsair descending into attack, the sound the Japanese came to fear as whistling death. As the war pushed toward Japan, a new threat emerged. Waves of kamikaze pilots diving toward Allied ships with single-minded finality. It was here, in the darkest hours of the Pacific campaign, that the Corsair became indispensable. Its speed allowed it to intercept kamikazes before they reached the fleet. Its stability allowed accurate fire even in desperate head-on passes. Many sailors owed their lives to pilots they would never meet, young men in blue flight suits, who hurled their F4U Corsair into the path of an oncoming fireball. But the Corsair was not only a shield, it was a hammer. More than 64,000 sorties, 70% of all bombs dropped by Navy and Marine fighters. Over 2,100 confirmed air victories. Each statistic is a tally of life or death decisions made in seconds. Each one is a fragment of a larger truth. The F4U Corsair became not just a weapon, but a symbol of American resilience in the Pacific War. By the time the sun began to set on the final year of the conflict, the aircraft had earned its place as one of the most formidable fighters ever launched. From a carrier deck, a machine that carried the weight of a nation's hopes and the burden of war on its wings. When the guns finally began to fall silent over the Central Pacific, another conflict rose on the horizon, cold, mountainous, and brutally intimate. The Korean War was nothing like the sweeping island campaigns that had preceded it. The terrain swallowed sound, weather grounded entire squadrons, and the front line shifted by the hour. Yet one thing remained constant. Marines and soldiers on the ground still looked to the sky for help. And more often than not, the help came in the shape of the F4U Corsair. In Korea, the Corsair traded high-altitude dogfights for something far more personal. It became a lifeline, screaming down snowy valleys, firing rockets into caves, breaking ambushes in seconds. That meant the difference between survival and disappearance. Pilots flew so low they could see the faces of the men they were trying to save. In return, those men remembered a single unmistakable sound: the whistle of the gull-winged fighter arriving just in time. To them, the F4U Corsair was not machinery, it was deliverance. Yet even the most reliable guardian could not shield everyone. Jesse Brown, a pioneering naval aviator and the first black carrier-qualified fighter pilot, found his engine failing high over North Korea. His Corsair went down behind enemy lines, settling into the frozen earth. Circling above him was his wingman, Lieutenant Tom Hudner. Protocol said to return to base. Instinct said to survive. But loyalty, something deeper than training, pulled Hudner toward a choice no handbook could justify. He crash-landed his own Corsair beside Brown's, desperate to pull him from the wreckage. In the end, Brown could not be saved. Hudner's Medal of Honor could not soften the tragedy, but it cemented something enduring. Naval aviation was built not merely on courage, but on devotion. War, however, has a way of demanding a price long after treaties are signed. Nearly 700 Corsairs were lost to non-combat accidents, victims of challenging visibility, harsh runways, mechanical failure, or simply the limits of human endurance. For every victory written in the sky, there was another story written quietly in a family's living room. Jim Tobel knows that silence well. Decades after the Korean front cooled, he and his father were flying their restored Corsair, a labor of love that had taken 10 years to build from crates of forgotten parts. They were on a simple mission, offering a small air show to veterans at a VA facility. When the engine began to fail, Jim watched from the wing of his SNJ as his father, low and slow, searched for a place to bring the aircraft down. There was no open field, only trees. The Corsair settled into them with a softness that belied the violence of the moment. Jim landed, as he had to, with his own son in the back seat. Only afterward did the weight of what had happened crash fully into him. Loss does not end a story. it pauses it. For 6 years, the Corsair remained grounded, half memorial, half reminder, and then Jim decided that the aircraft and the legacy it carried deserved to fly again. It would take thousands of hours, new metal, new hands, and a renewed heart. But like the pilots who once trusted their lives to it, the Corsair would rise once more. Long after the final shots of the Pacific War faded into memory, its lessons continued to shape American power and global strategy. The United States emerged from World War II not only with the world's largest navy, but with something far more decisive: mastery of the sea through the sky. Carrier groups became mobile airfields, floating symbols of deterrence, and U.S. naval aviation became the backbone of a new international order. Wherever a crisis flared, the world understood that American aircraft could arrive within days, sometimes hours, carrying both reassurance and resolve. In this broader story, the F4U Corsair stands as more than a wartime artifact. It represents a philosophy, one built on adaptability, technological daring, and a commitment to protecting those on the ground and at sea. The aircraft's dual nature, as both fighter and attacker, mirrored America's strategic posture, ready to defend, but equally capable of striking when necessary. Its success in the Pacific and later in Korea told allies and adversaries alike that American aviation was not just advanced, it was dependable. Globally, the Corsair's influence rippled far beyond U.S. borders. In the years after World War II, it served in the forces of nations navigating their own conflicts, including the small but fierce Soccer War between Honduras and El Salvador. Its longevity underscored a message that engineers and strategists understood well: a truly great design outlives the moment that created it. And the values embedded in that design, durability, power, and precision, became hallmarks of American air power throughout the Cold War. At home, the meaning of U.S. naval aviation grew even more complex. Veterans returned to a country transformed by victory, carrying stories that were difficult to tell, and at times, difficult to hear. Warbirds like the Corsair became bridges between past and present, allowing younger generations to see, hear, and feel the machines that had reshaped the 20th century. Airshows turned into living classrooms. Aged pilots, some seeing their aircraft again after decades, would stand quietly beside them, remembering the fear, the camaraderie, and the staggering responsibility of flying them into danger. In this landscape, Jim Tobel's restored F4U Corsair is not merely an exhibit, it is a continuation of the American narrative, a reminder that history does not survive on paper alone. It must be carried forward by people willing to honor it, maintain it, and share it. His aircraft's presence in the sky is a testament to the enduring legacy of those who flew before him, and a symbol of what American aviation has meant to the world: courage guided by purpose, innovation shaped by necessity, and freedom defended far from home. When a warbird returns to Earth and the engine finally winds down, a different kind of silence takes its place. A silence that feels almost sacred. The crowd thins, the heat from the exhaust fades, and the aircraft that once shook the sky now sits motionless, carrying decades of memory beneath its wings. For the F4U Corsair, that silence is a reminder that every victory of the Pacific War, every life saved in Korea, and every lesson carried home came at a cost that cannot be measured only in statistics or battle maps. The legacy of this aircraft is not defined solely by speed, firepower, or engineering brilliance. It lives in the stories of the men who flew it, their courage, their mistakes, their resilience. It lives in the Marines, who looked upward during desperate hours and felt hope rush toward them in the form of a blue-winged fighter. And it lives in the enduring strength of U.S. naval aviation, a force shaped not just by technology, but by the character of the people who risked everything in its service. What the F4U Corsair offers us today is something deeper than nostalgia. It invites us to reflect on the nature of responsibility, the kind that stretches across generations. When Jim Tobel flies his restored Corsair across an airshow field, he is not performing a routine. He is carrying forward the legacy of the pilots who never came home, of engineers who built the aircraft under the pressure of war, and of families who bore the burden of sacrifice. The plane is no longer just a machine. It is a vessel for memory. And perhaps that is the true power of history. Not the battles themselves, but the way they continue to shape how we understand courage, loss, and duty. The Pacific may be half a world away, but the echo of those battles still touches the world we live in. The flight of a single Corsair on a quiet afternoon reminds us that freedom is never an accident. It is earned, protected, and renewed generation after generation. So as you watch this aircraft disappear into the sun, consider this. What lesson does the Corsair still hold for us today? Is it resilience, innovation, brotherhood, or the simple, solemn truth that some stories deserve to be kept alive? Share your thoughts. Tell us the lesson you carry from this history. And if you wish to continue exploring the journeys that shaped American aviation, join us for the next chapter, because the story of U.S. naval aviation is far from over.